You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we have spoken at length about how the judiciary is serving as the biggest bulwark against Donald Trump's agenda. We now have Republican-appointed judges who are joining that parade against Trump. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, Brian, 2 more Republican judges just put a stop to Donald Trump's executive orders designed to do what? Punish law firms. You know, he's using these as basically shakedowns, trying to convince the law firms to come in on bended knee and give him stuff, right? Well, 2 of the law firms most recently on the receiving end of these executive orders, Wilmer Hale and Jenner and Block, saying, hell no, we're not going to bend the knee. We're going to court and we're filing, to put a stop to what is pretty plainly unconstitutional conduct, a violation of their First Amendment rights of association, of their rights to free speech, of the Sixth Amendment right to counsel, people choosing the counsel that they want to represent them. There's a whole parade of horribles that make Donald Trump's executive orders lawless and unconstitutional. And 2 Republican-appointed judges just came down hard on the Trump administration. I want to read just a couple of choice words that these Republican judges had for Donald Trump's unconstitutional executive orders. The first is Judge John Bates, appointed by whom? President George W. Bush. He said regarding Trump's executive orders seeking to punish, to retaliate against law firms that for some reason displease him, Donald Trump, he said, not only are these likely unconstitutional because they retaliate against protected speech, but they are disturbing and they are troubling. And as strong as that language is, Judge Richard Leon, another federal court judge, also appointed by President George W. Bush, said that basically Donald Trump is threatening the law firm's very existence. That's a quote. And then he went on to say this. So let me set it up, because these executive orders, among other things, say, the federal government has to cancel all contracts with these law firms. And here's the kicker. None of the lawyers, and we're talking about thousands of lawyers, Brian, none of the lawyers are permitted to set foot in federal buildings. Are you effing kidding me? Here's what Judge Leon had to say about that. He said, quote, "This is a government building," referring to the very courthouse in which this case was being argued. The Supreme Court is a government building. And then he said to the DOJ lawyer who was in there spewing this garbage, taking these unsupportable legal positions, demeaning themselves, debasing themselves, I would say even beclowning themselves, Donald Trump's DOJ lawyers who are going in and arguing this bullshit. The name of this particular DOJ lawyer is Richard Lawson. And here is a quote from that court hearing. When this attorney, Lawson, said he couldn't speak to whether the potential clients of this law firm, Wilmer Hale, would worry about their lawyers not being allowed to enter courthouses, the judge appeared incredulous and said, quote, "Have you practiced law? Have you had clients? Then use your common sense," close quote, said that federal court judge appointed by George W. Bush. The good news is, Brian, this makes a hat trick of judges putting a stop to Donald Trump's unconstitutional executive orders designed to punish law firms that displease him. And I'll tell you, Donald Trump is really on a losing streak in federal court, losing in court after court, losing from coast to coast, and he's going to continue to lose, I suspect.
Glenn, let me ask you a question from a very cynical perspective, and you let me know if I'm on point or if there's actually a more optimistic view of this. My question would be, hasn't Donald Trump already won if his goal is to try and cause some chilling effect or try to make it so that the clients of these law firms won't want to do business with any firms that are on the wrong side of this administration? And so even though they're getting shut down in court over and over and over again, hasn't really the fact that Trump is just doing this in the first place, him putting that marker down in the sand, isn't that already accomplishing the goal that Trump wants to accomplish, which is to show like either you get on board and you capitulate, or you're going to have problems with me and the administration?
You know, Brian, weak lawyers like weak politicians might be afraid to stand up to Donald Trump's lawlessness, might be afraid to stand up and fight for our democracy and for the rule of law. But the strong lawyers and the strong law firms are in there fighting it out and fighting hard, and they're winning. So it may actually deter the cowards from standing up. But guess what, Brian? The cowards weren't going to stand up anyway. What I see it doing is emboldening lawyers, law firms, and legal organizations. And I have a feeling the Wilmer Hales, the Perkins Coie's, and the Jenner and Blocks, those are the three major law firms, respected law firms, even storied law firms who stood up to Donald Trump and won, albeit in preliminary rounds of the litigation, but they're going to continue to win. I have a feeling they will attract more clients to their firms in the long run. Why? Because those clients are going to look at these three law firms and say, man, if they're willing to stand up and fight against the president of the United States and win in federal court, damn, those are the lawyers for me. So the lawyers that bended a knee, like Skadden Arps and Paul Weiss, I have a feeling clients are going to flee those firms and not even consider signing on to be represented by them because they bended a knee. They said, please don't punish us. And Paul Weiss actually pledged $40 million in free legal service to Donald Trump, political causes that he, wants them to represent. And it gets worse because Skadden Arps pledged $100 million. They basically gave in to the shakedown, but these other firms are standing strong, and they will come out ahead in the long run, I suspect.
Glenn, do you think there's some sense of regret from the Paul Weisses and Skaddens of the world who opted to immediately capitulate? I mean, Skadden did it before they were even really targeted. Do you think there's some regret seeing now that you have other law firms, the Covingtons, the Perkins Coie's, who are willing to stand up and fight back against this thing and actually show some conviction, which, by the way, to your exact point, gives some indication of how they would actually represent their clients in light of the fact that we're now seeing judge after judge, democratically appointed judges or Republican appointed judges push back against the blatant illegality of these executive orders?
Brian, if they don't have a sense of regret, then they're not self-aware, and they're certainly not reading the room. The room being the legal community writ large. I go online every day across several platforms, and I watch lawyers, and I watch law firms, and I watch legal organizations explode against the notion that law firms should bend the knee and even pay off Donald Trump to keep from being punished by him. So, if they're not experiencing regret, it's yet another reason that they're perhaps not in a position to be zealously representing anybody.
Glenn, in your best estimation, do you presume that we're going to see more executive orders targeting more law firms, or do you think the fact that this is facing so much pushback at the hands of these judges, again, democratically appointed, Republican appointed judges, that's going to have some type of chilling effect on the Trump administration from continuing to attack these law firms, in that it kind of seems like a futile exercise at this point?
Brian, the only thing I'm willing to lay my bet on is that Donald Trump and his flunkies that he has surrounded himself with will continue to act lawlessly. And I suspect that means more lawless executive orders, more unconstitutional executive orders. I'm writing a piece right now that basically analogizes the Trump administration to a RICO criminal enterprise, racketeer influenced and corrupt organizations. I prosecuted RICO cases. I prosecuted criminal enterprises. And with Donald Trump signing lawless executive orders, early and often, at least when he's not out golfing, it seems to me that these are intentional acts of lawlessness and unconstitutionality, and that is kind of what criminal organizations do. And I don't think Donald Trump cares that much about losing in court in case after case after case, because occasionally it has the desired effect of having one of these law firms come in and capitulate and offer him money, basically for the shakedown that these executive orders are. But if I could back up, the other thing I want to touch on, Brian, is kind of the messaging here, because I don't think mainstream media, legacy media, corporate media is doing a very good job at messaging what's really going on here. When I hear mainstream media refer to this thing that Donald Trump is doing, signing these executive orders, punishing law firms, and taking money in exchange for removing, negating or canceling out the executive orders. People are saying things like, well, that's just unprecedented and unusual negotiation. No, it's really extortion, because extortion is, in its simplest terms, the crime of extortion is using coercion or threats to obtain a thing of value from a person or an organization. That's exactly what Donald Trump is doing. So we, I think, as independent media, need to continue to beat the drum and get the word out about what's actually going on. Brian, another example of that is we are forever seeing mainstream media flashing up on the screen and discussing endlessly Donald Trump's frequent posts that all of these judges ruling against him are radical left lunatic judges. Brian, let's take on just 4 of the recent judges who have crammed the illegality and unconstitutionality down Donald Trump's throat. We just discussed 2 George W. Bush appointed judges who crammed this stuff down Donald Trump's throat, figuratively speaking. A couple of days ago, an appeals court judge in D.C., Judge Karen LaCraft Henderson, just ruled against him during an appellate case that was being argued in the Venezuelan immigrant case. Guess who Judge Henderson was appointed by? George W. Bush's pop, George H.W. Bush. And remember one of the first cases that the Trump administration lost, and boy, they went down in flames. It was when Trump tried to sign an executive order revoking the constitutional guarantee of birthright citizenship. You know who said that was blatantly unconstitutional? And you know what judge asked the question? Where were the lawyers in the room when Trump was signing this garbage? He didn't use the word garbage. That's my editorial addition. That judge, Judge John Coffenauer, appointed by none other than President Ronald Reagan. Republican-appointed judges are holding fast. So let's not continue to, prop up Donald Trump's claim, which I see mainstream media doing every day, that these are lunatic left-wing radical judges. No, they're not. Many of them are appointed by Republican presidents.
And really, this is just a testament to the fact that mainstream media has been doing what it's been doing for the better part of a decade, really, which is still treating Donald Trump as if he's operating within the same confines of politics as usual. And he's not. And the reality is that so long as he knows he can game the refs, which is to say, get the mainstream media to continue reporting on him this way, he knows that he can really operate with impunity because they refuse to hold him to account for the actions that he's actually taking, for the ways in which he is actually undermining the rule of law, the Constitution, our democracy itself, because they continue to insist on framing everything he's doing as if it is politics as usual, as if it is happening within the normal confines of how our government functions, and it's not. And he's the biggest beneficiary of that, which underscores how important it is to support media that I think meets the moment with the urgency that it deserves. So I would just ask those who are watching right now if you'd like to support our work, the work that Glenn and I do, as we head really close toward 500 episodes of The Legal Breakdown. If you haven't yet subscribed, please make sure to subscribe. I'll put the links to both of our channels right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.